Western states are eager to gain a loophole for unilateral action against Syria and don't care one bit about peaceful efforts to resolve the Syrian conflict. That's the impression the Russian Foreign Minister says he's gained after several weeks of a diplomatic marathon to avoid possible strikes against the war-torn state. RT's Irina Galushko is joining me now live from central Moscow. Hi there, Irina. So some harsh words indeed from the Russian Foreign Minister. What's behind this disappointment?
Well, this is an interview which he gave to Russia's Channel 1. And although some of the points that Sergey Lavrov has made in the interview were already said before, he was significantly and decidedly harsher this time around. It does look like Russia's foreign ministry's patience is running dry. For example, this was the reaction to the way the West seems to be treating the chemical watchdog OPCW, which is set to begin working on the framework of Syria's disarmament.
Our American partners are starting to blackmail us. They say if Russia does not agree to a Chapter 7 resolution in the UNSC, we will stop working with the chemical watchdog in The Hague. This completely counters what we agreed on with John Kerry, namely the chemical watchdog's decision and then a supporting resolution from the UNSC, but without Chapter 7.
Well, of course, the Chapter 7 means that in case Syria does not comply with the disarmament, it means that the military intervention could be employed. And the United States and France actually want to see that provision written out in the upcoming new resolution on Syria, which the UN is supposed to discuss in the next couple of days in New York. But at the same time, Russian Foreign Minister said that even though there has been a report coming from there should be a report coming from OPCW, and of course there was a report from the UN inspectors who were in Syria to determine which kind of chemical weapons were used, and whether they were used and who used them. The report actually didn't touch upon any of these major questions. It was it didn't dig deep down. It was a very kind of on the surface report, and Russian Foreign Minister said that is exactly what the West, particularly the United States, were hoping for, because their minds seemed to have been made up way before the inspectors have even gone into Syria to do their job.
Our partners are blinded by an ideological goal to remove the Assad regime. They want to show that they can call the shots in the Middle East. They are mostly concerned with proving their own supremacy and not the task that we are driven by, which is to solve the Syrian chemical weapons problem.
Well, once that report came out, again, the West was quick to say that this exactly points to the fact that the Syrian government has used chemical weapons, even though there is not a single word about exactly who has used the chemical weapons in that report. And Mr. Lavrov says that those who believe unilaterally that it was the Assad regime that has resorted to using chemical weapons are actually not being completely frank. As a matter of fact, there has been proof received by a Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs that the rebels themselves have received some unknown missiles. They didn't know what they were or how to use them, but they acknowledged the fact that they went on to use them anyways, which of course means that those missiles could be anything of the matter. They could as well contain chemical weapons. There's another part of There's another significant aspect, and that is the fact that some of the Syrian chemical weapon facilities are actually in territories which are now controlled by the Syrian rebels. That is also something to keep in mind. On the whole, however, Mr. Lavrov has said that it does not seem like the Western powers are interested in pursuing the diplomatic solution of the matter.
Right now, our Western partners are trying to forcefully push forward with this Syrian resolution. They are on edge because they understand that if Chapter 7 is mentioned, there's a chance for them to get approval with the UN Security Council for unilateral action. We encourage them to keep calm and stop coming up with resolutions that put the Convention for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons on the back burner and that prioritize US goals.
Well, from the get-go, it was obvious that neither the U.S. nor France needed a conclusive report by the UN observers, and they are essentially continuing with their blame game, as my colleague Anissa Naui reports.
As chaos and violence continue in Syria, so does the diplomatic battle surrounding the conflict. This week, a UN investigation concluded chemical weapons were used on August the 21st.
The environmental, chemical, and medical samples that the UN investigators collected provide clear and compelling evidence that the surface-to-surface rockets used in this attack contained the nerve agent sarin. We know the Assad regime possesses sarin, and there's not a shred of evidence, however, that the opposition does. Please, this isn't complicated. When we said we know what is true, we meant it.
But the UN report doesn't blame the Assad regime for the attack or mention other chemical weapons attacks allegedly carried out this summer. Russia claims there's still no evidence the Syrian government is guilty, and rather many suggestions the attack was a clever attempt by rebels to push for foreign intervention.
We have every reason to think that it was a provocation, a smart provocation, of course, but the technique was very simple. They used an old Soviet missile, which are no longer in service with the Syrian army. The key thing is that the missile carried the label "Made in the USSR."
Russia says the UN report was rushed and ignores relevant evidence of other chemical attacks in Syria. The Deputy Foreign Minister Rybkov in Damascus this week confirmed UN inspectors were informed.
This material, which was collected by the Syrian authority, was discreetly handed over to Åke Sellström, the head of UN mission here, mission of experts, which came and investigated the Ghouta incident, but never did so on the 3 subsequent incidents. And then Sellström was asked to look into it and eventually factor this new evidence into the final report of Sellström's mission. It never happened, in fact.
Still, the U.S. is pushing for a response based on this UN investigation. Just last week, the U.S. and Russia agreed to a 6-point plan to rid Syria of its chemical weapons. Damascus pledged to move forward and has so far complied.
The chemical weapons ploy, if you like, by the West and by the jihadists was countered effectively by Russia and Damascus, saying, OK, you want the chemical weapons? You've got the chemical weapons. It's interesting to note that the Free Syrian Army disavowed that agreement and will not, of its own, and let alone the other forces, will not give up their chemical weapons in this whole dispute. And John Kerry, the US Secretary of State, is not even pushing on that.
Instead, he is pushing on the UN Security Council to sign a strong resolution, possibly even mandating force. What recently seems like a small victory for diplomacy in the Syria crisis, a new road is slowly going back to old ways. As Washington continues to threaten force and Moscow push for compromise, the battle continues. Anissa Naoué, RT, Washington.